This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast. I'm Marianne Matzo.
I'm Charlie Navarrete.
So we'd like you to relax, get yourself something good to eat, anything that makes you happy.
Really?
Because it's only for an hour, so for 1 hour you can kind of drink what makes you happy.
Be unhappy. Oh, well, okay, that'd be better then.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
We want you happy.
Yes.
While you're with us.
I know, because sometimes if you're dopey or sneezy, it just doesn't work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're with us, we want you to just feel good. So every time you hear our voices, you go, "Oh, they're the nice ones." Anyway, thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie.
Really, because sometimes I get Charlie, when I hear your voice, it's like, my God, what fresh hell is this? But I'm glad you have a different reaction with your voice.
No, because I balance your fresh hell. Because my hell is not fresh. In the first half, we have our recipe of the week, including the origin and history of the nougat of the dead. A sentence I never in my life thought I would ever say, but there you have it. Charlie will be reading a blog post from Chris Sperry, who I met via Facebook well over a year ago, when I saw a post that he wrote about deciding to move from disease treatment to hospice care. And I was really impressed with his view and what he had to say. And I ended up interviewing him a couple of times, and he was very kind and very sweet to us as we were starting Everyone Died. Now, Chris died on October the 5th, 2020, and so we're going to be hearing from him in his writings and in his interview. So in the second and third half, we're going to present an interview that I did with Chris a good year and a half ago anyway. So, Charlie, tell me more about this nougat of the dead.
The nougat of the dead. Da-da-da! Is an ancient and, yes, exactly, da-da-da, yes. An ancient and uncertain origin. So, what in Naples is called nougat of the dead, da-da-da, we really need better sound effects, is a soft dessert from roughly, it's about 5 to 6 inches long, sold in pieces and by weight in many shops and small outdoor stores scattered along the streets of Naples. Well, actually, not just Naples, but that's where it originated. The shape is practically always a parallelopiped. You try that, saying that 3 times.
I love giving Charlie good words to say. It just gives me such a special feeling.
You're torturing me. So.
My goal in life.
You have succeeded.
But will you say it one more time?
No. I knew you were going to do that. So, parallelopiped. Oh, I said pedio. Pedo. Oh, shoot. Now I did it. Pipetto. Like Geppetto?
Is that like a a parallelogram?
It's exactly what it is. But however, a parallelogram is a parallelogram. This Geppetto is basically 6 parallelograms. And specifically with the nougat of the dead, da-da-da, will you please stop playing that every time I say this phrase? What phrase? Nougat of the dead. Da-da-da. So, in this case, it is, the 6 parallelograms, the parallelepiped, Geppetto, is basically a miniature of a dead body. That's the shape.
Whoa.
Yeah. Which also gives reference to the color of the wood obtained through the chocolate base. Now, naturally, the exterior.
Oh, so it's like a coffin kind of thing. It's like a nougat coffin.
Actually, yes. Yes.
Wow.
And
man, I think I've died and gone to heaven.
I've
died and gone to Naples.
If you're going to die and go someplace, why not Naples? and just in time for Halloween. Halloween's not that far away.
Not that far.
Nope. So, and of course, as with any coffin, this bad boy can be, decorated, any way you choose. And, people, find it or ask for example, maybe like, white chocolate, dark chocolate, or just filled with cream and milk chocolate.
Huh.
Yes. So this type of nougat is different from the classic one because of the ingredients. In this bad boy, there is no honey, but cocoa, and filled with hazelnuts, dried or candied fruit, coffee beans, almonds, puffed rice, and other ingredients like coconut. Now, in Naples, it is impossible not to buy even a small... I'm sorry, what?
Nothing.
Okay. So in Naples, it's impossible not to buy even a small quantity, a symbol of the most particular festivity of the entire Italian calendar. There are stories about Dracula, vampires, and ghosts. And some time ago, we proposed the legend of the ghost child, about Grand Cafe Cambrinus, or the myth of Raimundo de Sangro and his Cappella San Servo, which is a chapel in Naples, which holds, among other chapel stuff, anatomical exhibits.
Ooh.
Scatty stuff, eh, kids?
Mm.
Moving on. As Marianne mentioned, Chris Sperry, an early friend of the show, wrote a blog about deciding to move from disease treatment to hospice care. Here is what he said. It is a question of timing. In basketball, it surfaces when the home team is trailing late in the game. Fans admire the fighting spirit as their team presses, fouls, and spends timeouts hoping against increasingly long odds to pull out the win. But it gradually becomes apparent that the game cannot be won. At a dinner party, the question becomes obvious around midnight. It's been a lovely evening and some fun may still be squeezed out, but the hosts look tired and the momentum is fading. So it comes down to this. How do you know when it's time to make the graceful exit? To be neither the party pooper nor the last guest whom the hosts are just wishing would let them go to bed. How does the coach know when hope is lost and it's time to stop fouling, calling one more timeout and pull all the seniors into the game? And so it is with my stage 4 colon to liver to lung cancer. I want to be remembered as a fighter. No one wants, well, I got tough and he quit on his tombstone. Yet it may be worse to have the phrase, it was a blessing, spoken too many times at my funeral. Because, of course, the blessing will really have been conferred on my exhausted family and friends who secretly wish I'd left the party a little earlier. When my oncologist for the last 10 years recently said, if you want to stop treatment, I would not argue with you, Carol and I realized that it's time to play all the seniors and enjoy a graceful exit. Now that the fight is over, we have more time to reflect on and share what we've learned. We hope it may help other patients and caregivers on the same journey and provide a smile or two. So with that, please go to our webpage for additional resources for this program and a link for the recipe. We hope you will follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. As a nonprofit organization, we are dependent on the kindness of strangers and always appreciate your donations. We also have a memorial page that you can add a remembrance to. Please go to our webpage to donate in support of our work at www.everyonedies.org. That's dies.org.
All right. So in our second half, when I met Chris, he has a blog, or he had a blog, and he wrote his intro to his blog to say this. I was diagnosed with colon cancer and successfully treated with radiation, surgery, and chemo in 2010. Cancer reappeared in my liver in 2016 and then spread to my lungs. After 4 liver surgeries and 60 rounds of various chemo programs with declining effectiveness, Carol, who's the wife, and I faced a question in January. Is it time to stop treatment? We decided it was. There was a lot of time to think once you head down this path. We thought it might be helpful to share some observations with others on this final journey. And so he agreed to do a couple different interviews. You've heard him on our colostomy podcast that we did, and if not, go take a look up that podcast. Chris ran a what was that called, Charlie? That Ironman, that's what it was. It was an Ironman marathon wearing a colostomy a year after he had surgery.
Jeez,
which,
wow, yeah,
you know, you could have impressed me with the idea of running an Ironman marathon without all the rest of it. And I always thoroughly enjoyed talking with him and interviewing him. And this was actually the first interview that I think I'd ever done. And this is Chris talking about how do you decide when it's time to elect hospice care. Now, we have a podcast all about hospice care. You can look in the show notes, just click on it and listen to it. I'm not going to go over what is hospice care here. But I see many, many people struggling with the decision, well, should I start hospice care now? Because one of the things about hospice care is that it's meant for the last 6 months of life, and that you can't be continuing chemo and radiation and going to the hospital and all of that when you're receiving hospice care. The benefits that you have are to be supportive care in the last 6 months of your life. As if anybody has a crystal ball that says, oh, and this is the last 6 months of your life. You know, you never know. Am I starting too soon? Am I starting too late? The reality is that in the United States, people start too late. People in hospice spend on an average of about 2 weeks in hospice care when they could have had 6 months. So if you want really excellent symptom management, pain management, support, when you get to the point where you're tired of going in for chemotherapy or radiation, or the effects of those things are too much, and you think, you know, those of you who maybe are at the beginning of your disease management, you might think, I'm never going to get tired of this. Well, most people do. Getting into the car, going into the chemo center, the radiation center, having surgery, all of this can get really, really exhausting. Now, how long that takes is really a very individual thing, but it'll happen. Or, like in the case of Chris, his oncologist said, if you want to stop, it's okay. It's really hard for oncologists actually to say that. They do their work to try to cure and to try to save. But we don't have a cure for every cancer, and everybody is built differently. So what happens with each and every cancer and treatment and everything has a variability to it. Some people can take certain things and just fly through it and do really well, and other people have a real difficult time. And so, you know, you kind of have to look and say, how am I feeling? How am I feeling about this decision I made? Is this something that I want to continue to do? You might have family members who are saying, you can't stop now. You have to continue to fight. The reality is everyone dies. And if it's not the cancer, it could be the chemo that is the result of your death. It could be side effects from the radiation. It can be a lot of things. But it's an individual choice. And it's real hard to say to the people that love you to say, you know what, I'm done with this. I don't want to do it anymore. And it's not that I don't love you, and it's not that I'm not fighting, but you can borrow from me. You can say, look, everyone dies. And something's going to get me anyway, and I don't want to go out using all of my time driving to the chemo center getting chemo, or using all of my time going for radiation, or feeling like crap and then having surgery. It's okay to make the decision that enough is enough. And so it helps to hear out what other people have to say about how they went about their decision. And so let me introduce you to Chris.
I want to welcome you, Chris, and thank you so much for being on our show and sharing your insights with our audience, because many people face the decision of, do I elect hospice or not? And I think they will learn a lot from your experience.
Well, thanks, Marianne. Thanks for having me.
So about how long ago did you think about, or at what point did you begin to think about hospice? Is that something throughout the trajectory of your disease, or is that a more recent thought?
It's more recent. We had been given the diagnosis that the cancer had come back and spread initially to my liver 4 years ago, and then we're on a very aggressive treatment plan for that, and then found out that it had spread to my lungs and continued to be on a really aggressive treatment plan, all the while expecting, success. It wasn't until the fall that the various chemo regimens that I were on began to be less and less effective, and we kind of slipped down from, plan A to plan B to plan C. So we knew we were on a trajectory that wasn't, that wasn't as positive as we wanted. And then in December, when I had a regular scan, the results really kind of confirmed, hey, it really looks like the disease is beginning to advance. There aren't good options. There was a trial I could consider, but it was very, speculative at that point, not a great fit for me. And my oncologist, who I've had for 10 years, Dr. Blaise Polite at the University of Chicago, just a great guy, we've always had the kind of relationship, Carol and I, where we've said, level with us, and, we want information, and we want you to be direct, and even though it may be upsetting to hear, we want you to tell us. And he said in a very kind of gentle way, he said, if this was a point where you wanted to stop treatment, I wouldn't argue with you. And that was what really kind of started us down the path of thinking, okay, maybe it was time to now, think about a different game plan that was more about enjoying the time that we have left together, with our family and friends.
Did you, was it a decision that was yours alone, or did Carol have equal input? You have 3 kids. Were they involved in it, or was that something that you said, this is my life and I need to make this decision alone?
No, it was definitely, Carol and I spent a lot of time talking about it. I mean, I think it helped that all the way along this path, we've always been very, honest with each other, and and kind of knew it's possible, we could be headed down this path someday, but always planned to not be. I've never gone into a scan or a CEA blood test. I've never not expected good results, and so we always, kind of talked about the possibility of things, going this way, but never planned for it. So we did talk about it. We tried to collect our thoughts, the two of us, and then it was unfortunately Christmas time with the family. So we waited, to kind of get through the Christmas holiday. And a few days after Christmas, while we were all together with the 3 of our kids and their significant others, and then we just talked through, this is what the doctor said, this is where we're at. We have not completely made the decision yet. We want to do just a little more research on this trial that might be available, and but it's doubtful that it's going to be a practical option for us. And so we are thinking that this is what's going to be the game plan. So we we wanted to share the information with them after we had a chance to collect our thoughts, but before the decision was made, and we let them know that's where we were headed, and then we circled back after a few more weeks after we'd done a little more, research just to be comfortable that we were for sure picking the right path, and then we said this is what we've in fact decided to do, and this is how it's going to change. The biggest thing is going to be I'm not going to be spending nearly as much time in the hospital, for treatment. And I part of my treatment was I have a hepatic arterial infusion pump that is like a titanium hockey puck inside of me that Sloan Kettering put in, and it requires maintenance even when it's not delivering chemotherapy. And it's every 3 weeks to go in and kind of like get your oil change basically with through your abdomen. And so that was nice not to be tied to that specialty procedure every 3 weeks. So we really, talked through it with them, and then we were all kind of rallied around the game plan of now it's about having good quality together.
How did your kids respond to your, that couple days after Christmas? If you're comfortable telling us, how did they respond?
Yeah, my kids are pretty stoic, so I think they probably, I know they talked a little bit more with Carol about it than with me, which I guess is probably not uncommon in a lot of families, that there's maybe one parent that kids open up to a little more, and probably easier, honestly, to talk to the person who's not ill, I suppose. But they were sad, of course. But I think they also had seen what life had been like the last 10 years, and that it had consumed a lot of time. So I don't think any of them felt like, oh my gosh, why would you give up? Why not? Can't you do something? I think they had seen that we had done all the things that were practical to do. So there was never a sense of second guessing from them, like, are you sure there's not something else? They knew that we had, really pursued things aggressively. And then they pretty quickly rallied around, okay, let's enjoy our time, together. And we over the last 6 months have spent a lot of really high quality time together while I've still been feeling relatively well. So they've handled it really well. I'm sure privately there are a lot of difficult moments, but we've been really proud of the way they've handled it and have had a lot of good time together since.
Well, and I think that also reflects on the upbringing that you and Carol gave them in terms of a sense of mortality. For some kids, they think about a parent dying, and that's the first time they've heard of it or thought about it. And Americans tend to look at death as an option that you can choose, and it's of course not an option. You can try to go with grace and on your own terms, but even sometimes that's not an option. So somewhere along the line, your kids must have learned that, death happens, and that it's particularly sad and very poignant when a parent dies, but that is part of the circle of life that it seems like in modern society we've lost touch with.
Yeah.
So what month did you go into, did you start with hospice?
Well, and this is, I was never quite sure of really what the right timing was, other than just sort of, I guess, knowing that if I was going to stop treatment in January, curative treatment, then we were connected with a palliative care nurse at the University of Chicago who helped me through some symptoms I was still having from chemo. I was fairly, just coming off of about 60 rounds of chemo, and I had a lot of side effects from that. And so initially the palliative care nurse helped me, with neuropathy and just recovering from from that, and it took several months, but began to feel better and better after that. And then the time frame we'd been given by the doctor back in December was, you likely will have 4 to 6 months of feeling good, and then 4 to 6 months of not feeling good. So that was kind of a start of the year 8 to 12 month window. So it wasn't until just the last month or so that we then now have connected with a hospice provider here locally and are having home hospice visits, and have been we have a hospice nurse who is coming regularly. We don't need a lot of ongoing care yet, but we're grateful to have set up the relationship with the provider and to be building a good relationship with our hospice nurse. And she has provided, I occasionally need oxygen, and she has adjusted some of the medications along with the doctor, which actually have produced a higher quality of life than I had before we started hospice. So I guess I'm one of those people who has learned, gosh, you think of starting hospice to die, and my initial, month on hospice has been, I feel better than I have felt in the last 6 months, which is kind of strange.
It's actually, really pretty common, because when symptoms are well managed and you're sleeping well and your pain is managed, you feel better. I mean, it's, not really rocket science, but sometimes it feels like it is, because you think to yourself, well, that hospice, that's that thing, everybody dies who goes to hospice, but, the purpose is, pain and symptom management and improving quality of life until the end of life. But most people don't think about, I'm going to feel better, and I'm going to have better quality of life. And it's great to hear you say that, Chris, because that happens a lot. I used to work as a hospice nurse, and I have student nurses who would go with me, and they, would expect it would be, almost a religious experience taking care of people who are receiving hospice care. And, they're like, what do you mean they're out shopping? What do you mean they need a different kind of wheelchair because they can't, get into the stores that they want to? And what do you mean they're planning a trip to Jamaica? And, there was one lady I saw a story about, she wanted to pick out new wallpaper for her kitchen, and we would sit and look at wallpaper books, and the students would be like, what the heck? What's going on here? And it's like, this is hospice. This is what it is. It has
been a pleasant surprise. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you've kind of been in hospice for about a month, do you say to yourself, geez, I really probably should have done this a few months ago? Because there's a lot of really good benefits in terms of support and monetary, in terms of paying for your medication, and as you found, really excellent symptom management. Do you ever think to yourself, gee, I probably should have done this sooner?
I have thought about that. I think in some ways felt a little bit like, I don't feel, I'm still in that, 4 to 6 months of feeling relatively good, even though, as it turned out, in retrospect, I wasn't feeling as good as I could have been, but I felt like I'm still recovering from the chemo side effects. So I just kind of had associated, I won't need hospice until I'm into the next phase that the doctor described, which is, and then you're going to have the 4 to 6 months of feeling bad. And so I felt a little like, don't start the hospice process until I'm sure I'm on the other side of that divide. And I probably took him too literal, in that, and kind of felt like I'll know when I've crossed over. And I know that's such a difficult thing for, doctors to be asked that kind of question. But yes, in retrospect, just given with really the changes that they made to the meds, the getting the oxygen now, of course, as you know, when you're not on hospice, and I started to feel like I think I do need oxygen periodically because I had not transitioned to hospice. The process to get that, to qualify for it medically, involved testing and insurance requirements that I just really wasn't willing to go through, particularly during the COVID times, where once I moved into hospice, the very next day, the oxygen was delivered, and I got immediate relief. So that was a great lesson.
And these are great lessons for our listeners, because people will put it off. And I've had so many patients where, I don't want to start that too soon. It's like, well, the insurance benefit of hospice is intended for the last 6 months of someone's life. But there is really no way to know if it's the last 6 months of our lives. And so if you start early and you get 7 months, 8 months, or 10 months, that's cool. We're happy to recertify that. Nobody throws you out of hospice. But in our country, the average is somewhere between 3 and 7 days that people spend in hospice, that they could have had 6 months of support. And to a person, you go in and you do the admission and you get all the services there, and they're like, oh my God, why did I wait for this? And people wait, kind of out of two reasons. One, they're afraid that, hospice means they're going to die and they don't want to die. So if they don't go into hospice, they're not going to die, which, we know isn't true. The second barrier is that a physician has to, or, a healthcare practitioner has to write the order. And so what happens is the patient doesn't say to the physician, you know what, I think it's time for hospice. Can you write me an order? And the physician doesn't say to the patient, I think it might be time for hospice. If you want, I'll write you an order. So there's this sort of conspiracy of silence. The patient thinks, well, if the doctor thinks I'm ready for hospice, they'll mention it. And the healthcare practitioner, the physician, says, well, if they're interested in hospice, they'll ask me. And what ends up happening is nobody says anything. And so as a palliative care nurse practitioner, I would say to people, this would be a good time to think about hospice. And if you want, I can write you that prescription and you can have it. And whenever you're ready to call, you can. And sometimes just in the course of even that visit, they'll say, yeah, I think you're right. We, have the social worker come in, they choose a hospice, we get the script the next day or sometimes that afternoon. Hospice will go out and do the admission, and they're like, oh my God, why did I wait? And so a good lesson for the listeners is, well, why are you waiting? Don't wait for the physician to bring it up. You were lucky that your doc mentioned it to you. But if you think, the symptoms are getting, more severe for me to handle, the treatment is more of a burden than a benefit, then start to think about, like if you're on your second, third, or fourth round of a different chemotherapy agent, you really should think about how much of that do you want to do, what's the wear and tear it's doing on your body, is that something that you want to continue. So I like to look at it in terms of benefit versus burden. And when you're first starting out, probably 10 years ago, the benefit far outweighed the burden because you're a young guy. You're just starting out. It's like, like you said, you're optimistic. All right, I'm going to go in. I'm going to beat this. And not everything can be beaten. Some cancers are just real buggers. They don't want to stop, and we don't have all the stuff to make it stop. And so it can get to a point, 10 years is a long time, isn't it, Chris, to be doing that?
It is. And I think for me, we had always approached it with just our whole family was such a positive kind of attitude that we're going to beat this, that there was no gradual transition from, we're going to beat this to, oh, no, we're not. It looks doubtful. We're pessimistic. We're sad. We're still in it, but it doesn't look like we're going to, be able to, to get a good outcome. For us, it was right until the moment where it became apparent that we couldn't beat it. We kept, fighting hard. And so for me, that was a hard transition to go from one day you're sitting, in the doctor's office talking about your scan and your mindset is, okay, this isn't good, but okay, what's the next thing? What's the plan D chemotherapy that we're going to use? What's the next surgery? What's the next, should I do some radiation? And then to shift gears to, well, now maybe it's time to completely walk away from that mindset that you're going to beat this to you may not be. That was it wasn't a gradual, sort of a bend in the arc. Mm-hmm. It was a sharp, turn. And it was, for us, that was the right thing, because we either wanted to be kind of all in expecting success, or say, okay, we gave it our best. Now let's not, agonize over that anymore. And now it's a different plan. And now let's make this plan the best plan it can be. But it's different. Mm-hmm. And it's a sharp turn.
And there's different.
But I wouldn't have wanted to.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, but I wouldn't have wanted to linger there for a long time. For us anyway. I mean, some people may have a different timetable, and they really want to process that and spend time slowly making that turn. And that I'm sure is a path for some people. But for us, it felt right to make that turn sharper. And I think partly because we'd always contemplated it could happen, but never really planned on it. No.
Right. You wrote in a blog about, I think it's called "Put the Seniors In" or "Let All the Seniors Play." I forget. I'm not too much of a sports person to remember the correct term. What's the title exactly?
Play All the Seniors, which essentially is putting all the seniors. Yeah, put all the seniors in at the end of the game, kind of, the people who may not always get to play. Yep.
Well, when I was reading your Facebook page, I think it was your brother-in-law wrote "losing gracefully," and I thought, well, my head goes to, he's not losing. He's changing his goals of care, and his focus is on quality of life and on the treatment. Because I'm thinking like a palliative care nurse, and but I think losing gracefully, your brother-in-law is talking about something different that's related to your blog. So can you, for those people like me who don't really understand sports analogies, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess the mental image I sort of had in my mind is in a basketball game when the team you're rooting for and the team you love is behind, and the game is getting later in the game and they're still behind, but everybody senses, hey, it's still winnable, and so you're rooting for them. You admire how hard they're playing. They're calling timeouts. They're pressing the other team. They're fouling to get the ball back. And you think, boy, it's the time's running out and the odds are getting longer, but they can still pull it out. And I really admire how hard they're fighting, and I'm enjoying and rooting for them, and I want them to win. But then, maybe it gets to the point where there's just a minute or two left, and they're down by 20 points, and it just kind of becomes apparent to everybody, this game is anymore, and at that point, two things can happen. The team can keep fouling and calling timeout, and the game can last, many, many more minutes and be, kind of, difficult and not a pleasant experience really to play in, honestly, and, not a pleasant experience to watch. But often the coach will recognize that moment, and they'll call one final timeout, and if they ever get to play, some of the seniors who are less talented, they'll put them in. And they'll say, this is, now your time, and you're going to get to play. We're not going to foul. We're not going to keep calling timeout. It's going to be a graceful end to a really good game, and it's going to be a better experience for the people who are playing the game, both teams, and it's going to be a better experience for the people who are here cheering for us. They're going to feel like we gave up. We gave it a good fight, but they're also not going to feel like, my gosh, there's 7 seconds left and you're calling another timeout when you're down by 20 points. Why are you doing that? And so that was kind of what I had in my mind.
I think that's, now that you've explained it to me, I think that's a great analogy, because that really is what happens. And you can either, there's lots of ways to end the game, and there's not necessarily one way. And what works for one person isn't going to work for another. But I think part of it is acknowledging that the buzzer is going to go off, right?
Right.
It's not an indefinite thing. Nobody gets to play forever. No team gets to play forever. And so knowing that there has to be an end, then choosing, how are you going to manage that? And lots of, people make lots of different choices. And it sounds like your choice in terms of electing to have hospice gives you the quality of life and the time with Carol and your kids and your friends and yourself that you want to have. How would you say?
Yeah, it was a decision. It was a decision for for me how I wanted to spend, but also for my family. And I guess the other thing that went through my mind a little bit was, if you make that decision to stop, no one wants to have, the going got tough and that person quit, kind of carved on their tombstone. Mm-hmm. No one wants to be a quitter, but I have been in situations before where someone has, finally, passed on after perhaps maybe, making a kind of a different decision. And sometimes people are, you hear the phrase a lot at their funeral, "Oh, it was such a blessing." And that's another thing that kind of weighed on me a little bit, is it's occurred to me before when I've heard that so of course some of that is, it is a blessing, but sometimes there's a note of, wow, that really was, tough brutal at the end. And I guess I felt like it's not maybe always a good thing to have, it was such a blessing, said so enthusiastically at your funeral, because I think people are kind of like, wow, that was exhausting for that person. What a tough way to go. So finally they're out of their, misery. And it was exhausting, honestly, for family and friends. And so that was another thing that I guess I kind of figured into the equation.
Well, and also having hospice changes that equation, because they're not going to let you suffer. They're going to manage your symptoms. And it's those people who are suffering. Sometimes I'll see posts on Facebook about, my mom or my dad's in terrible pain. What do I do? And I want to say, why are you asking Facebook? Get the right services in the house so that, hospice can come in and manage that. I feel bad for those people because they don't have to suffer, and the family doesn't have to watch them suffer. It's not necessary. How would you say Carol is doing, or what do you think Carol's thinking about at this process? You guys been married, 40-some years? And, it's hard to be the person who watches, as we've said, and it's hard to be the person who then has to get up the next day and keep going. Do you have any thoughts about what she's thinking?
Yeah, I think it's hard to speak completely for her, but I mean, she has been just such a great partner to me through this and through our whole lives together. I think she has so many things kind of going through her head. Many of them are, are around the practical things, like, well, what's life going to be like, by herself for a time without me, with the kids being gone. So it's just the two of us who live together. And then, one of the things that didn't hit me for a long time was, when I think about this, kind of question, for me, it's a matter of, a relatively short period of time. At some point it kind of ends for me, and it's not something I don't have to think about anymore. She has that, and then she has, the rest of her life. So she has a much longer time horizon to think about things that, includes a lot of things that won't be of concern to me because I'm gone. And so I think it took me a while to realize. I kind of felt like we had sort of the same plate in a lot of ways, and I guess it took me a while to realize she has a ton of things on her plate that will become really, in her face and very meaningful after I pass away. And those are things that they're not really real for me. Not that I don't care about them, but I won't have to deal with them. She will. And I guess I just didn't think about how many questions and concerns she has that are longer and deeper and in many ways more difficult than the questions and concerns I have. And so that's been a big kind of learning for me to think about the enormity of what's on her plate.
Yeah, it's grief is sort of the gift that keeps on giving, and that you never do get over it, and you never know when it's really going to hit you and affect you. And one of the good things with hospice is that they will provide bereavement support for your family for a year after your death, and so really encourage them to take advantage of that, because that's a great service. And some people like support groups, and like we have a podcast on grief, so there's lots of ways to get resources and kind of up that learning curve. Because I see people where I hear people say, well, it's been 10 days. When am I going to start feeling better? It's like,
right.
Oh, you've just started, and
yeah.
You're never going to get over it. And there's going to be things for the rest of your life that's going to trigger that. And it's kind of new information for people. They didn't know that, or they don't realize that. And it's you talk about managing expectations. It's like, let's manage those expectations, because you'll have good days, but you'll also it's like a roller coaster. You feel good, and then that other hill comes, and you're going straight down toward the ground, and you're thinking, geez, can I get off this thing already? But no, there's another hill where you're going to feel better, and and so it goes. So my thoughts go to Carol, and really encourage her to use her resources, and because you feel good now, you can do things maybe to get birthday cards together, or something that will keep that place in her life, sort of keep that memory. I'm sure she's never going to lose the memory. It's not what I'm saying, but there are things that that you might think about, that you think, well, this will help ease that first Christmas, or that first birthday, or that first anniversary of where you're not there to share it with her and with the kids. You only have one kid that's married, so, and there's no grandbabies, so there's all those events that when they occur, they're going to say, I wish Dad were here. And so if there's a way that you can be there, if it's a video or a note or a letter, get one of your best friends to say, here's the stuff, and I want you to make sure that it gets to the kids at the right times.
Those are great ideas. Carol she's been good about helping me, assemble a little list of things, big events that we know, will come, and it will be nice for us to, feel like, we're able to in some way recognize them and celebrate them, together. And so we've done some of that, which is very comforting to me, and it really puts a smile on my face, kind of thinking like someone's wedding a few years down the road, to have a card kind of pop up with a thought,
Yeah.
That's it for this week's episode. Please stay tuned for the unending escapades of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete, reminding you that to himself, everyone is immortal. He may know that he is going to die, but he can never know that he is dead.
That's heavy. And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we will see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.